Good evening. Before we formally start the event, just to inform you that on 7th, Friday morning, we have a bowling event. Thank you for those who have registered. Those who have not registered still can register. The registration at the venue will start at 8 o'clock and we'll close the registration at 10 o'clock. And we intend to finish all the games by 1 o'clock, 1 in the noon. Once again, a very good evening to all of you. Distinguished speakers, Mr. Prakash I. Patel and Mr. Ryan Conway, our valued guests, past chairman, fellow chartered accountants, Chairman C.A. Naveen Sharma and Vice Chairman C.A. Mahmood Bangara, and my other colleagues in the managing committee, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the ICAI Dubai chapter and its managing committee, it's my pleasure to welcome you at this evening event. We thank and appreciate continued support of all our sponsors, our title sponsors, Aramco Real Estate Group, our titanium sponsors, Hamria Free Zone, principal sponsors, NMC and UAE Exchange, Danube Group, Mayur Batra Group, Shobha Reality, Oasis Investments and Tele Solutions, our institutional partner, DPS Private School Group, platinum sponsors, Lulu International Group, Commercial Bank of Dubai, Malabar Gold and Diamonds, AGMC, IFCO Group, Al Rawabi Dairy, Gulf Islamic Investments, Dubai Sports City, and SIS Singapore, and our media partner, Khalis Times. We thanks once again for all our sponsors for their continued support. Talking about the event of today, it's a seminar on how to work, live, and migrate to the USA. As we all know, the United States of America is one of the world's leading countries in all the fields, be it sports, technology, music, movies, art, food, etc. The country has always been a role model to almost all the developed and the developing countries. It was the linchpin around which the Western civilization evolved, and since then it has remained an important destination for any dreamy traveler, be it tourist for recreations, student for studies, or professional for career progression. Ladies and gentlemen, today's seminar is an inspiring seminar where industry experts, successful entrepreneurs will share their knowledge about doing business, working, investing, and relocating to the United States, including the current business and investment potential, legal requirements, failures and successes, and insights and practical advice to achieve professional success in the United States. We welcome both our speakers. Let's have a big round of applause for our speakers. Today, you have opportunity to gather relevant information and clear your doubts. Thank you once again and have a great evening. Now I request our chairman, C.A. Naveen Sharma, to please address the audience.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Teachers' Day and happy Paryushan. I know that a lot of people are fasting. I welcome each one of you from the bottom of my heart. Today is an emotional day for me, so as to the current managing committee, as we are hosting our last CPE event. This is the 38th CPE event in the last 11 months. You must have read the news that there are two companies whose market capitalization crossed $1 trillion. Can you name these companies? Amazon and Apple Corporation. So I will share a little bit of a story. I read a lot, I listen a lot. They are Apple Corporation and Amazon. I would like to share two small stories from the founders of these two corporations. Journey is the Reward is the book on the life of Steve Jobs. It is my favorite book, and there is a small story in it. When Steve Jobs was removed from Apple Corporation, the company he has co-founded, by its board of directors, he then straight away left to India, to Banaras. He has a deep Banaras connection if you have read his book on Steve Jobs. in India in search of his guru. And his guru, as you know, the Neem Karoli Baba. He went to Banaras many times in his student life also. He discontinued his education. He went to Banaras, but he could not find his guru. So that is, and he advised, if you will see in the YouTube, Mark Zuckerberg, that if your company is in a problem, you go to India and go to a temple in the name of the Karoli Baba. The time he met a saint, and the saint told him that Banaras is not your destination. Doing excellence in everyday life is the only way to life, fulfilling the life worth living, and rest is history. What he has created in his journey has changed lives of billions of people like you and me. If you will see his book, when his biographer asked him, which book you want to read? He said there is only one book in the world to read, and he turned around his iPod that was not launched during those days. This is, if you read his Steve Jobs book, he has himself said about it. There is another book, there is also a little story in a book called The Everything Store, Jeff Bezos and the Age of Amazon. He is the founder of Amazon. After graduating from Princeton University, he worked for investment banking jobs, and then he resigned. When he resigned, he said that he took 1 year time. He went to 200 different cities in America, took a car, and he videographed everything. Wherever he has gone, wherever he has interviewed, we have seen America. And after 1 year when he completely videographed his journey, he has started an online book selling called Amazon. A lot of people is interested. Everybody said that he will fail. But whenever, 1 year back, he has another company called Blue Origin. When his reusable rocket failed, he has seen what he has seen in 200 different cities, and he came to know it is not the destination, whether you are fail or pass, it is the journey which is the reward. Why I shared this story? Because we all have started 11 months back our journey, and I have written in the chairman address, journey is the reward. We have started our journey from 1st October 2017, and in the last 11 months, we have conducted, as I said, 62 meetings, 146 CPE hours, 13,000 plus members attended physically in our meetings, and if we have 321 members today, we will cross 55,000 collective CPE hours. This has not happened in the history of ICAI UAE Dubai chapter in the last 36 years. And Dubai being the largest and the best overseas chapter, it has not happened outside India. I'm not sure about India because that data is not easily available. Journey is the reward, and me and the entire managing committee enjoy the journey. We have reached to the end of CPE journey today, and day after tomorrow we will have family bowling event, as Anish has mentioned. 900 plus members already confirmed. So I request each one of you to come in time. It will start at 8. And we will close 900 because there is no way we can accommodate more people. And now comes to today's event. Dubai and Gulf currencies are pegged with US dollar. We like it or not, but this is a fact that most of the good paying jobs are from the US companies. When I came in 2001, I used to work a company called WPP, which is the largest media firm on the planet. They said, you have a US visa. I said, I don't have. And during those days, applying for the US visa, you need the history and so many other things. And I lost the opportunity to go early in my career there. Second option came when I planned everything for my son, and he graduated from the Wharton University. But we have never thought what kind of visa, what kind of problems, how to migrate. A life planning is required. We Indians pay a lot of attention for the education, but we do not know the rules and regulation about the investment, what is the priority, what is not. When he crossed 21, we apply for his US investment program. And then when you attain the age of 21, only he is eligible now. So I cannot go, my daughter cannot go, so the planning is failed. So I thought it's better that we have this seminar so that people can have the knowledge what is required. Because most of the companies, if you will work in, most of the investment or the visa rules are based on the US rules. So the framework we will understand, we chartered accountants are intelligent people, then it is easy for all of us to see what are the rules in Netherlands, Australia, UK, and elsewhere. So, as we said, Mr. Prakash and Rayan both are very expert, and we thought ICAI will never associate with someone who is not very good. And I'm happy when I came to know that Mr. Prakash is traveling to India, and I said, our last CP event has to be with him. He has no time, but I put down and I said, I know him for many years, that he should be the first speaker, so he came for a day here, and give a big round of applause to Mr. Prakash and Rayan. So as you all are here to listen both the speakers, I now invite Mr. Mahmood Bangara to introduce the first speaker to all of us. Give her a big round of applause to incoming chairman.
Respected Chairman, guests, distinguished speakers, our guests, very warm good evening to all of you. Good evening. Today, we have the last CP event, and the next is AGM, and it is much of a formal session. So, the last 11 months, it has been a quiet journey of commitment, stress, and complete dedication, and definitely the kind and number of events that has been brought by the managing committee under the leadership of Naveen Sharma. You're all aware of it. Gentlemen, there has been a lot of effort. Give a round of applause for the kind of dedications, commitment they all have shown. And today is as a vice chairman, only 2-3 sentences. Today is the last CP event. I don't understand migration to USA. That's what Naveen is saying. So we are all going to continue here. I'll be taking over on 29th as chairman. And also we had a wonderful journey, and he's saying that journey is the reward. It is the journey to USA, I don't know. So it has been a great experience. And today we are going to have this session to migrate to a nation which is many people's aspirations, and which is the greatest and biggest country in terms of economy and in several parameters. And also, as you mentioned, many of friends and family mates would be there, how to join them. Now it is my proud privilege to introduce an expert, Mr. Prakash I. Patel, Founding Principal and CEO of Georgia Center for Foreign Investment and Development, GCFID LLC. Mr. Patel is the founding principal and CEO of GCFID. Until 2011, Mr. Patel was a partner in a closely held family business which consisted of a portfolio of companies including insurance, finance, lodging, and real estate development. His responsibilities include acquisition and divestiture of several related business entities, development and disposition of various commercial real estate assets, and the overall planning and execution of corporate strategy. Mr. Patel has spent more than 20 years in executive management positions in global telecommunication industry. His experience includes the following: chairman and CEO of RAN Global Net, located in Prague, Czech Republic, vice president and board member of GTVcom, working throughout Hong Kong and China, director, sales of Unisource Carrier Services located in Switzerland, and so on. Mr. Patel received a Master's of Business Administration from Warwick Business School and an undergraduate degree in Electrical and Electronic Engineering from the City University in London. Originally from London, England, Mr. Patel currently resides in Georgia. Ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause for Mr. Patel to address us. Mr. Sundar, right now you can introduce the next speaker, because Mr. Patel mentioned that they wanted to be together on the stage. So there will be a little interactive sessions. Sundar? Yeah.
Good evening to all of you. Mr. C. Ryan Conway is a founding principal of Georgia Center for Foreign Investment and Development. He is currently a principal with GCFID. Mr. Conway is a founding member and principal of GCFID, complementing his GCFID investment activities. Mr. Conway is also the founding member and principal of Dominus Property Partners, a private real estate company focused on direct investments, development, and asset management. Mr. Conway's transaction experience includes equity and debt financing for asset acquisitions, preferred equity and subordinated debt recapitalization, asset management solutions, including debt forgiveness and restructuring, detailed financial analysis for asset underwriting, and full service development planning and management. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ryan Conway.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Tough crowd, huh? Well, it's a pleasure, absolute pleasure to be here today. We understand that immigration is a key issue for everybody. Mr. Mehta set quite a wide agenda of topics that we intend to cover, and we will do our best to cover them. So as introduced, my name is Prakash Patel. This is Ryan Conway, and we're here to talk to you on behalf of our company, Georgia Center for Foreign Investment and Development. GCFID is a USCS approved regional center for the state of Georgia. USCIS is United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, a Department of Homeland Security that is responsible for approving and adjudicating visa petitions in the US. Really, what I want to cover today is a set of topics from my perspective, from Ryan's perspective, on immigration. What we really want to do is to get your opinion and try and address your concerns. We're really here for you. So, as Naveen said, we want to make this an interactive session. Immigration is a very, very dry topic. I don't want to sit up here and present to you and expect you all to listen and understand everything. So what we want to do is break the presentation down into pieces and try and stop and get some interaction from the audience and get them engaged so that we can be sure that we understand what are your concerns and that we can address those concerns as best as we can in the time that we're here. In addition, myself and Ryan will be here for tomorrow, and we're perfectly available both after the event and tomorrow if anybody wishes to talk to us and maybe on a personal level or to just address some more topics in detail. So with that, can we put the presentation up?
Is this okay? I'm good. I'll follow up real quick while we're setting this up with what Prakash said. First of all, thank you guys very much for having us. It's an honor. We appreciate you guys welcoming us here. We were concerned whether or not everybody came to see the presentation or if it was to see Naveen on his last presentation. So hopefully it goes well. Like Prakash said, if there's something that the entire crowd is missing, please slow us down, stop us. We can try to give more details to that specific topic. Without further ado, I'll turn it back over to you, Prakash.
Thank you. I'm going to walk around. I'm not used to standing at a podium. From my perspective, and based on the input that we've already received from various members, this is what we think you want to hear. And we've got a lot of detail. And what I don't like to do is sit here and read slides to you. I don't think that's a productive way. So what I'm going to do is walk through the various issues as we see them and I'm going to check, do you have any questions? Is there anything more? Is there anything you want to address? I really want this to be an interactive session so we can both get the most out of it. So first, obviously, we've introduced ourselves. We'll say a little bit more about what is GCFID. Going to address U.S. migration. Just to give you some statistics on what is U.S. migration today. Talk about the various visa options. So for people wanting to migrate to the USA, what are the options ahead of you? Then we're going to introduce what we recommend, which is the EB-5 Immigrant Investor Visa Program. For many years, the US has been a desirable destination to migrate for Indian citizens. However, in recent times, a lot of the visa opportunities have become delayed due to excessive backlogs. The Immigrant Visa Investor Program, the EB-5 program, as it's known in short, we believe is an opportunity for Indian citizens to overcome some of those hurdles. And that's why we're going to spend a little bit of time explaining what the program is and what the process is. We're going to talk a little bit about the different investment structures. Because it's an Immigrant Visa Investor Program, that means there is an investment. So over and above a normal visa program, you're actually required to invest in a job-creating project. We're then going to talk a little bit about the Trump factor. Many of you, I think Naveen has indicated that you're very well read and you're aware of some of the challenges that have raised their heads as a result of Mr. Trump's policies. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, not too much, but a little, and try and explain where the US visa program is as a result of those policy updates. And then we're going to talk and give you some real case studies. Some of our projects that we've actually done. Ryan's going to walk you through the different investments, the different criteria that go through those projects, so that you can actually see how the theory is actually applied in practice. And finally, we're still going to have a session for questions and answers. So if anybody's a little bit shy, I don't suppose you are, but if you're a little bit shy to ask questions, we will have a formal session at the end. And then after the presentation, Ryan and I will be available should anybody want to speak with us in person. So first, a little bit about our company, Georgia Center for Foreign Investment and Development. It's a private equity company. In other words, we are not a state-owned enterprise. We are private. The company is owned by myself and Ryan. And our goal is we're really into private equity real estate, so we provide a portion of the capital for project financing. And we use the EB-5 visa capital as a function of that investment. The company was founded by myself and Ryan. We started the process in 2008. We were approved in August 2009. We're headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. And we were approved as a USCIS designated regional center. So we were the first regional center in the state of Georgia, and we were approved for the entire state. We're also the most active in Georgia. We're currently on our 14th EB-5 project. Optimal investment for us is between 1 and 50 million. Generally, we're more within the middle of that. We do projects, a number of smaller projects each year, typically $3 to $5 million of EB-5 investment, and a couple of larger projects, typically $18 to $25 million. Ryan will go through some of the projects that we've done and some of the capital that's been raised from the EB-5 visa program for those projects. Current investment verticals, that's really the types of industries that we put investment in through the EB-5 program. Hospitality, obviously hotels. Healthcare, we've invested in a hospital as well as some senior living facilities. Class A or T office, everybody knows Class A office. It's sort of very well positioned, high-end office facilities. But also Class T is something new. It's technology-enabled office buildings. And Ryan will talk about the CODA project a little bit later in the presentation. That is an example of Class T office. And of course, urban and adaptive reuse, that means taking an existing building and repurposing it for something else, maybe retail, office, maybe multifamily. And we have a multifamily project that we've currently launched, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. Our guiding principles, we see a lot of similarities, especially speaking with Naveen and working with him through, especially the last few years. Integrity, it's important that we do things right and we do the right things. Partnership, we work with best-in-class people in all aspects of our business. In terms of real estate investment, we work with partners that are very well capitalized, that are very well experienced, have a strong track record, so the investment risk is more in their shoulders than the EB5 investors' shoulders. Innovation, we always try and improve and learn from what we do, and also most of our real estate investments are new construction. And excellence. Excellence is measured by our investors and our partners and our clients. And what we do is when we have an EB5 investor, we hold their hand all the way through the process. We don't just take their money and run. What we do is from the very beginning, as we go through the process, you'll see, we're there explaining the investment. Once they have invested, we're there to answer questions. If USCIS, Homeland Security, has any questions on their petition, we're there putting the answers together, working with their immigration attorney, and we are there with them on an annual basis, giving them annual reports on the project, giving them regular K1s on their investment status, and finally, we're with them until we have returned the capital back to them. So that's how we measure excellence. So what is US migration? What's the status? What are the options? First, some statistics. The United States is the third most popular destination for Indian migrants worldwide, after the United Arab Emirates and Pakistan. We're going to focus on Indian citizens because we think that this is a large and important segment. And as we go through the presentation, I'll provide some statistics and numbers to give you a reason why they're our focus and why we feel that the membership is a very good fit for the opportunity that we have. In terms of immigrant population, there are 44 million immigrants residing in the US in 2016. These are statistics that are provided by the relevant authorities. This accounts for around 13.5% of the total population of the USA, which is around 323 million. Just to do some comparisons with the United Arab Emirates, which you all know and which I'm learning and Ryan's learning, about 88.5% of the population of the UAE is an immigrant population. Population is roughly, depending on who you read, somewhere between 9.5, 10 million, telling you something you already know. Therefore, there are around 8.45 million immigrants as of 2016. Again, during 2016, 1.5 million foreign-born individuals. So in terms of new immigrant population, 1.5 million a year in 2016. And out of that 1.5 million, India was the leading country of origin with 175,100 migrants, new migrants from India. As of 2015, there were 2.4 million immigrants residing in the United States. Now that's a low number, and it's a low number because it doesn't include descendants of those immigrants that are also of Indian origin. It doesn't include people that may have migrated through areas such as Dubai or Trinidad, traditional areas of a high Indian population. But what it does tell you is it's second to Mexicans, which we all know would be a very significant group in the United States. Still, Indians account for almost 6% of the immigrants in the United States and less than 1%, 0.75% of the total US population. As a comparison for UAE, and again, these are probably conservative figures, 2.62 million, 31% of the population is considered to be of Indian origin in 2016. Finally, in 2016, nearly 1.2 million immigrants from Middle East, North African region lived in the United States and accounted for around 3% of the country's immigrant population. So that's just to give you some sense of perspective. We can talk land area. We can say that the United States is almost 1,200 times the size of the United Arab Emirates. We can say that India is almost 400 times the size of UAE. So therefore, in terms of density and immigrant population, the UAE is probably amongst, it's significant, extremely significant. So if people go to the USA, they can expect, well, here in the UAE, you can see Indian population pretty readily. There in the USA, because it's such a vast country, it'll be much more spread out and not so readily visible. In terms of the leading reasons for immigration to the United States, We're not just talking Indian population now in terms of myself and Ryan. We deal with people from all over the world of various nationalities, but they're pretty consistent in terms of why they want to go to the United States. Pursuit of freedom, escaping political and social repression. Fundamentally, employment and education is by far the main reason, especially for their children and family. Better quality of life in many cases for the family, and of course also currency risk. They see the US dollar as a strong currency for their future financing. During 1990s, as you probably know, a number of immigrants from the Middle East surged due to the limited employment opportunities for young people. We often see in our discussions young people is the focus of why parents want to support an EB-5 visa. Usually we see that the children are educated in the West. Typically they go to US universities. They go for a number of years, not just 1 year, usually 3, 4 years. They build up a network of friends, and generally they don't want to come back to their home country. And when you're on a temporary visa status, the EB-5 is a very viable option for them to then be a permanent resident of the United States. So what are the options? Generally, a citizen of a foreign country who wishes to enter the United States, they first must get a visa, no different from any other country. There are two visa options, a non-immigrant visa for a temporary stay and an immigrant visa for permanent residence. You probably heard the terms. What I'm now trying to do is give you the context and definition behind the terms. We're going to just skirt around temporary visa, non-immigrant categories. We will mention them, but the focus of our presentation is on permanent residency, so the permanent visa categories. There are multiple paths to permanent US residency, and there are an array of different visa channels. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1990 provides permanent annual worldwide level of 675,000 LPRs. So that means there are 675,000 visas available for lawful permanent residents every year. And it's further broken down into specific levels for each visa category. The immigrant visa category, i.e. the permanent visa category, has two main components. A family-based component, which has an allocation of 480,000 of the 675 visas, and the employment-based preference, which has an allocation of 140,000 visas. And the EB-5 category, which we're mentioning, the investor visa, is part of that employment-based category. We also talked just in the foyer before this presentation about diversity visas. Diversity visas are the visa lottery. You may have heard of the US visa lottery program, where they're issued 55,000 visas per year. The diversity and the visa lottery is geared towards those countries that are very low in terms of immigrating to the United States. So the thought behind it is to increase the diversity of the US immigrant population. There are 55,000 visas available every year. And just to give you some context, in 2017, there were 20 million applicants for those 55,000 visas. So clearly, the United States is a huge demand for many people from all over the world. Earlier in the presentation, I said that there's about 1.5 million people migrating to the US each year. When you look at the numbers, I know you're accountants, I know you're scrutinizing the numbers. Up there it says there are only 675,000 visas available. Clearly something doesn't add up. And the reason is that the immediate relatives of US citizens and refugees and asylees adjusting for lawful permanent residency, they're not exempt. They're absolutely exempt from the counting of those visas. So therefore, the 1.5 million would be the 675,000 plus those people that apply for residency because they're relatives of US citizens, plus any refugees and asylees. Although visa petitions are adjudicated on a first-come, first-served basis, annual limits prevent applicants from obtaining their immigration benefits right away. So as I said earlier, USCIS, the United States Immigration Service, adjudicates the visa petitions. So they look at your petition and they tell you whether you're approved or not. Once you're approved, you then don't immediately get your visa. You then go into a queue depending on your priority date. And the priority date is the time at which you actually submitted your petition to USCIS for adjudication. That wait time is known as the legal immigration line. And the priority date defines what is your place in that legal immigration line. So although the petition can be approved, you've then got to wait until your number comes up before you can go and claim your visa. That legal immigration line, the issuance of visas, visa numbers, and the setting of priority dates is handled by the Department of State. And the Department of State, on a monthly basis, issues something called a visa bulletin. And I'll show you some of this as we go through the presentation. And that indicates when these limitations on visas are available. That's a lot of information. Are you with me? Okay. I'll be asking questions later. So what this slide does is it gives you an overview of what I've just talked about. The two different visa categories, non-immigrant visas and immigrant visas. And then, as I said, we'll talk a little bit about the temporary visas and the non-immigrant visas. There are these categories, B1, B2, which is a business visa, multiple entry, limited to 6 months, but you are not allowed to be employed on that visa category. It's a temporary visa, you have to return back to the home country. Many of you are familiar with the F1, which is the student visa. The J1, M1, these are all different types of student visa categories for vocational training, etc. P1 is for exceptional talents, athletes, artists, entertainers, and again it's a temporary visa, people coming to the US and then leaving. In the middle, where you see H1, L1, E2, O1, those are dual intent visas. So those are categories for which you're allowed to start on a temporary basis, but then you have the future option to then transfer to a green card status. H1 is for specialist workers, L1 intercompany transfers, E2 is investor visa, and O1 is for exceptional workers, exceptional people. People like scientists, global CEOs.
People like Prakash.
No, I don't think so. And then finally, we're going to hear is what we're going to talk about in detail, is the immigrant petitions, which are the employment-based. There are 5 categories of employment-based visas, and the family-based. And again, there are 6 categories of family-based visas, and I will go into them in a bit more detail. But first, I want to talk about something called the H-1B visa. Everybody, I think, here has heard of the H-1B visa. It's the most common visa used by employers to bring in skilled foreign workers, and it's very high on the target for Mr. Trump. During his presidential campaign, he put up a number of people, US nationals that were in IT that have been displaced by H-1B visa recipients, and he has ordered a review of the entire H-1B visa program. Essentially, you need to have a job offer, you must have a bachelor's degree, and the employer has to file a petition with USCIS for approval. Once that petition is approved, only then can the recipient go and claim his work visa. Generally, the H-1B starts October 1st with a filing on April 1st of each fiscal year. The duration is 3 years, and you can have one extension, so it's 3 years plus another 3 years. The annual visa cap is 85,000. When the Immigration Act of 1990 was passed, the H-1B visa was limited to 65,000 visas. Then subsequently in 2004, they increased it by another 20,000 visas by allowing people with master's degrees. Even though the cap is only 85,000, it is a visa that is under significant demand in the order of 300,000 to 400,000 petitions every year. And therefore, within 5 days of October 1st, when the category is announced as available, usually 85,000 is oversubscribed, and therefore USCIS implements a lottery. And as a result of that lottery, at least 50% of visas are simply denied without even looking at, just by the lottery program. So You're allowed a cap of 85,000, but in essence, over 300,000 get approved each year. And the reason is most H-1B visas are approved outside of the cap. These uncapped visas occur in one of two ways. Either they're petitioned for by special employers such as universities and research organizations that are exempt from the visa cap, or they're given to existing H-1B owners that are then renewing their visa or are changing their employers, so they're not counted towards the cap. As a result, more H-1B recipients are staying in the country for longer periods of time, and I'll show that India is a big element of this in the next slide, as they wait for their green card. So they're applying for the H-1B in parallel because it's an intent visa. They apply for their green card. Their green card gets under a significant wait time, but under the rules, they're allowed to keep renewing their H-1B until their green card petition becomes current. So Indians represent a growing share of these renewal H-1B visas. Around 71,000 spouses of H-1B visa holders have received work authorization under Obama's 2015 policy. And this is something that the Trump administration plans that it wants to end. Also, the program is under review, as I said, by the Buy American, Hire American policy. So the H-1B visa is under a significant threat. Here's some stats on the H-1B visa. You can see that India, over the 10 years, 2007 to 2017, had 2,183,000 H-1B visas allocated. The next country was China with less than 300,000. So that gives you an indication of the significant gap. Also, as you can see from the visa, that there is only 85,000 per year, yet you see 200,000 in 2017 issued to India, 247,000. That gives you an indication of how high a number of Indians there are on H-1B visas that are continually renewing, waiting for their green cards to be approved. Okay, let's go back from the H-1B back into the permanent categories, just so that I can give you a little bit of an explanation. What is E, what is preference, what is family? So this table, what it does is it gives you an idea of the family-based employment, and it tells you a little bit about the numerical limits. So the first category is the immediate relatives, something called the IR category, and that's for spouses and minor children of US citizens and parents of US citizens who are 21 and older. And because they're related to the US citizen, there is no visa cap. A direct spouse, no visa cap. And so far, Obama is comfortable, President Trump is comfortable with that. However, these other categories are under threat. The first preference, second preference. First preference is unnamed adult sons and daughters of US citizens. He's not happy with that. The second preference and second B preference, third preference, fourth, are all related not to US citizens, but to lawful permanent residents. So spouses and minor children of green card holders, etc. And this is under threat by the Obama administration. On the right-hand side, you can see the limits.
Hold on. Not by the Obama, by the Trump organization. By the Trump organization.
I'm sorry?
I said by the Trump organization.
The Trump administration organization,
yes. Yeah. Administration, sorry.
So then we have the employment channels, EB1, EB2, EB3, EB4, EB5. EB1 is foreign nationals of extraordinary ability. There are 40,000 visas available for that. EB2 is foreign nationals who hold advanced degrees, 40,000 visas available for that. EB3, skilled workers, 40,000 visas available. EB4, religious workers, special immigrants, 9,940, known as 10,000, that's a 7.1% country cap. Fifth preference, immigrant visas, 9,940. EB5, that's the EB5 investor program. So the EB5 investor visa program has approximately 10,000 visas available every year. I mentioned the Department of State Visa Bulletin. Now this is where it becomes interesting for Indian nationals. We've highlighted the Indian national issue here in blue. As you can see, there is a backlog for Indian citizens wishing to apply for a US visa for the EB1, EB2, EB3, EB4 visa categories, and there is no backlog for the EB5 visa category. What does that backlog mean? The Department of State has said that they are currently processing in the EB1 category, the first line, they're currently processing EB1 visas from Indian nationals for those that have a priority date before the 1st of January 2012. So that means that they filed probably 6.5 years ago. Now the problem with this is, if you're in EB2, EB3, you can see that the problem gets much, much worse. And I'm going to present a slide that kind of helps focus on this a little more. Because recently, as early as April, USCIS actually was forced to issue some data on this. Currently, as of April 20th, 2018, there are 632,219 Indian immigrants waiting for their green card. That's a huge number. What this table also tells you is that the EB1 category is the one with the least wait right now, but that wait is 6 years. And the EB1 category is if you're of extraordinary ability. If you're in the advanced degree category, you're going to wait 151 years before you can expect your green card to be approved. These are actual data. If you're in EB3, 17 years. If you look at the EB2, it's the one which has the largest backlog, 69%. However, this also shows that they only got 13% of the visas in that year. So it means that the visa allocation is not proportional to the backlog. So let's kind of put that in a little bit more perspective. Why is that? Well, the first thing is, as we said earlier, there's only 40,000 visas available for each category, and you can't mix and match visas between categories. So the EB2, for example, is extremely over demand. There's a very, very high demand for that visa. Secondly, there's a per country limit of 7%. So each country, in order to maintain diversity, each country is only allowed 7% of that visa category's allocation. So 7% of 40,000, around 2,800 visas each year. Okay? So if you've got $216,000 petitions and you divide by 2,800, that's a lot of years. And that's the problem. So how do I summarize this picture? Many Indian citizens with the goal of relocating to the US are faced with procedural hurdles that increase their difficulty of living and working in the US. Basically, they're frustrated. They've gone through the process, done all the right things, and now they're waiting. Student H-1B, students applying for H-1B visas are subject to the lottery with very poor odds. There's a random selection forcing them to return home after their optional practice training period. The optional practice training period is something that after you're a student, you're allowed a limited time in which you can be employed, but then after you're on a temporary visa status, and then after that you have to return home. Those citizens lucky enough to make it through the lottery and have an employer willing to sponsor them once they're through the lottery, they then face massive green card backlogs, creating a decade-long wait. So those are actual based on facts. That's exactly what it is. That's the situation for Indian nationals today. What Ryan and I are here to present is that the EB5 program presents a number of solutions to these issues. Number one, there's no EB5 backlog. I showed you in the charts. And even if there is a backlog, right now, and I'll show you the stats in a minute, there's no backlog for India. So if there is a backlog, then what it means is that you're limited to that 700 or so visa allocation per year. So it means that your wait will be shifted 1 year. Maybe if there's a big demand, your wait will be shifted 2 years, but it's not 10 to 15 years. And today, there's no wait. You avoid the H-1B visa issues. I've said that Trump administration has begun restricting the H-1B visa program through policy memorandum, executive orders. Spouses have been issued work authorization. We'll likely see that benefit eliminated. So if you're a spouse of an H-1B holder, and the H-1B holder is getting a temporary visa renewal because his green card is being delayed, the spouse will never be able to work. I never mentioned the Ac21 dependency. Hundreds of thousands of H-1B workers are stuck in the EB2, EB3 backlogs. And they reached a specific step in the green card process, and they're allowed to extend their green cards, because remember, the green card was only allowed for 2-3-year periods. But under AC21, which is the American Competitiveness in the 21st Century Act, they're allowed to extend and keep extending. And that's why we see over 700,000 people from India, 750,000 are at risk. So in an effort to open tech jobs to US workers, the Department of State, so as a result of Mr. Trump's Made in America, Hire in America policy, they're now considering new regulations that would eliminate this benefit. Should they do that, and who knows if they will or if they won't, 750,000 Indian H-1B holders would be at risk. They would have to return home. Finally, there's an additional benefit of being a green card holder. As a permanent resident, many students are eligible for in-state tuition at public universities. And as I said earlier, universities is a key decision-making criteria for many parents in terms of undertaking the EB-5 visa program. In-state tuition rates are significantly cheaper than the full tuition rate. So as a resident, you pay much, much less in fees than you do if you're a foreigner. Do you want to cover this for a little while? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the EB-5 Immigrant Investor Visa Program. You're very quiet. I'm not getting any questions.
You just told them there's delays on everything so far, so.
Are you
So-
Well, because, okay, the question is how come the Chinese are so less in numbers? The reason is because typically, well, there's a lot of reasons in terms of originality, English speaking, employability. But in terms of strength in technology, that's where India has been very strong. And that's why the H-1B has been the main thing. The other reasons is the way the US regulations have evolved. It was only in the 60s that they opened up immigration to non-Europeans in the United States, and that has been a process. So there are a variety of different complex factors, but I would say number one is that the Chinese have not really been desirable outside of the railroads and workers and things. So that has started to change from the 1960s onwards. But more importantly, the Chinese were very dominant in the EB-5 visa category, and we'll come to that in a little while. But Indians have been totally oblivious to the EB-5 visa category, and that now is starting to change. And in fact, as you start to see in the previous slide, the Chinese are now number 2 on the H-1B because they've maxed out on EB-5. So those are some of the considerations. They're not all, but it's quite a complex discussion. So US Congress created the EB-5 visa program in the Immigration Act of 1990. The purpose is to attract foreign investment in order to create jobs. So there is a criteria that each unit of investment must create 10 jobs. There are 3 basic criteria or requirements for the EB-5 visa. First, the investor must establish a business or invest in an existing business. And that was created or restructured after November 1990. That was just a function of the law at that time. Second, the EB-5 investor must have invested $1 million or $500,000 if invested in something called a targeted employment area or rural area in the business. So it was originally the Millionaire Investor Visa. But if you invest in a high unemployment area, that investment is reduced to $500,000. However, right now, as Ryan will say a little bit later in the presentation, these numbers are under review. The program is looking to be extended at the end of this month. It's been traditionally extended every 3 years. Lately, it's been given short-term extensions because a lot of people, and especially even the Trump regime, are looking at, number one, increasing limits, number two, putting more scrutiny into the program. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. Third, the business must create or save full-time employment for at least 10 workers. By working with the USCIS-approved regional centers such as our company, GCFID, The jobs may be direct, indirect, or induced. And again, I'll cover job creation a little bit more, but that's an important difference.
Other countries have investment categories or investment visas. The U.S. in this particular program is the only country that has it's technically an economic development tool or a job creation component to it. So for every investor, that investor has to create 10 new jobs.
So there are two types of EB-5. Something called a direct investment, which is a non-regional center investment. A direct investment is where you invest in your own company. You have more management control over your investment. The difficulty is if you're only investing $500,000 or $1 million and you can't, and your family can't be counted in the job creation, it's not easy to develop and sustain 10 full-time jobs for the lifetime of your investment. The only jobs you can count are the direct employees of that business. And for $1 million business, typically it's very hard to employ 10 people.
And let's talk about that real quick because we'll get into the direct, indirect, induced, all that stuff. The direct jobs are, let's use a hotel for example. The direct jobs would be the people that actually physically work in there, the people that have W-2s, so they're actual hourly based employees that have to meet the full-time employment base. So we'll talk about the difference between direct and indirect and induced jobs here shortly.
I'm conscious that we're saying we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, but when we come into specific examples, a lot of this will become clearer. Sorry.
The 10 jobs that should be created.
Yes.
Period of time.
They usually, the whole process is a process that is 5 to 10 years. And typically within 2 years of your 526 petition, within 2 years of your green card being approved, you have to create those jobs. And we'll come into some of that in a bit more detail and what are some of the issues behind that. But let's say you're a direct investment. Let's say you're doing some kind of franchise restaurant, okay? Just the land and the building and the equipment, you're going to be spending a few $1 million. You're not going to be spending $500,000.
We can get into it right now. I mean, since we're on that job creation, since you had that question, the direct jobs, like we talked about, are the physical jobs that you can actually count. The indirect jobs come through a number of different places, but the two key drivers to indirect job creation are construction expenditure and the induced or the new revenues for that business in that location. And the economic development, the revenue from that business then creates new jobs in the direct vicinity. But the biggest driver of job creation, and this is why when we make these investments, there has to be a construction component because it's construction related. Most of that comes from hard construction costs. Those hard construction costs, each one of them you guys are accountants, understand a little bit of this to some degree, but they have a multiplier that's tied to them. The economist runs his job creation. It spits out the new job creation as a result of those dollars that are spent.
So if you're doing your own business as a direct investment, you can only count direct jobs. You can't count indirect jobs. So that is a big limitation. So the Regional Center program is attractive because you can count indirect and induced jobs, but also it doesn't require an investor to manage the project. So we manage the project for you and we report to you. And we put in together best-of-class people to manage the project. So as we said earlier, there are 10,000 visas available each year under the EB-5 program. And that investment, takes care of yourself as an investor, as the petitioner, your spouse, and any children under the age of 21. So if you're an investor and you have children over the age of 21, they would have to file a second EB-5 visa petition.
That's key. I think that's one of the biggest challenges on all of those other delayed visa categories that Prakash talked about. The planning that needs to go into it so that you're not having to, let's say if your son goes off to the U.S. and goes to school, he's done with school, he gets a great offer to go work somewhere, and accepts that offer, but then he's on a temporary visa category. That particular individual's in a very challenging position because they need to find a way to stay there. If they choose to stay there permanently, they need to find a route to do so. Now, if they do it after 21, the dependents cannot be the other children in your family. They cannot be, they can't be you. Let's say you're gifting that money to that individual because he clearly may not have the capital to be able to do so. You cannot be considered dependents as a result of that investment.
Okay, so as I said earlier, the unit of investment is currently $1 million, $500,000 in something called a targeted employment area or a rural area. A targeted employment area, we basically look at the project's location down to the census tract level. We look at the unemployment level per census tract, and we put together a package of census tracts. If the average unemployment is 150% above the national average unemployment level, then that location can be counted as a targeted employment area. It's a little bit too technical, but in essence, there are ways that project investment can be reduced by half, and all of the projects that we do are in targeted employment areas. They're $500,000 investment.
Most of the projects, 98, 99% of the projects in the EB5 marketplace are within a targeted employment area at the $500,000 level.
So USCIS, when looking at an investor's petition, looks at a couple of things. It looks at the project, we take care of all the project documentation. But from the investor's perspective, it looks at the source of funds and the background check. The source of funds is a particular important issue. They want to be sure that the money that you invest, the $500,000 that comes to the US, they want to be sure that it has been legitimately earned. So they will look at 5 years of your tax returns. If you said that I've got this money from earning, they'll look that you paid the appropriate taxes and that your bank statement that's owned by you shows the employer putting that capital in. If you say that you sold some property, they will look that you were the prior owner of that property. They will look at who you sold that property to, that sale funds came into your account, and that those funds then came from your account to the project escrow of the project. So they will look at the trail of the source of funds from where it was originated all the way to when it finally comes into the USA. So in essence, the EB5 program is especially attractive to those high net worth individuals seeking to obtain a fast-track residency status in the USA. So really, it's attractive to those people that are experiencing a visa backlog, but that can afford to take an investor visa.
Let me take that. So we had a question earlier about why China wasn't.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Is there any lock-in period? Like how long you have to remain in this investment when you get your investment back? And do you get any return on?
We'll talk about all that good stuff here and give us, I don't know, 10 slides or so. Maybe
That's a
but
project-specific, investment-specific issue, and we will go through an actual investment and answer that question.
So all this slide is showing right here that, as you can see, in this particular category, in 2008, the number of petitions that USCIS received was only, let's call it 1,300 petitions. Now, that doesn't include maybe some that were withdrawn. There's a little bit of margin there. However, you can clearly see there's been a massive explosion that happened somewhere around 2013, let's call it 2012 and beyond, mostly into 2014, 15, 16. And the key driver within this particular category has been China. China has created themselves a problem because now they have a similar backlog to as the other categories. But what this is just showing is just this category has become really popular, and the main reason or the main user of this particular category has been real estate and real estate developers. And we'll talk here shortly about that. There are a lot of major real estate development companies that actually have started regional centers to procure capital for their projects. We particularly believe that there should be some realm of independence between the developer and the regional center, but we'll get into that here shortly.
That's it. So what is a regional center? We've said that there's a regional center program, there's direct investment. What is a regional center? So our company, GCFID, is a regional center. Regional center is an organization designated by Homeland Security, USCIS, and it sponsors capital investment projects for investment by qualified EB-5 investors. Regional centers have a defined territorial scope. In our case, it's the entire state of Georgia, and approved for projects in specific industry categories. In our case, we're approved for all categories in the state of Georgia.
Real quick, let's talk about that real quick. A lot of people, Georgia in particular. Georgia is in the southeastern United States. It's the largest city in the southeast. It's home to Coca-Cola, CNN, UPS, Home Depot, Mercedes-Benz of America, Porsche of America, and the world's largest airport. So just put some perspective on where we are and what the state of Georgia actually means. That's what the state of Georgia is there.
So regional centers are required to report annually to USCIS on performance, and we are also subject to a random audit by USCIS on any project that we have in the pipeline. The major advantage of regional center designation is that we can take advantage of indirect job creation. And we'll talk about that as we talk about project capital stack and financing. Majority of EB-5 projects are actually in real estate development and construction. I would say in excess of 70–80% are in real estate. Project financing generally comprises a combination of developer equity, EB-5 funds, and depending on the project size, some combination of institutional equity and debt. So if it's a small project, typically senior loan. If it's a large project, such as some of the ones we've done, Coda, etc., then there's institutional equity and institutional debt. I think on that one, that was a $272 million project, and we had two major banks, I think JP Morgan and Fifth Third Bank, as senior lenders to the project. The majority of EB-5 capital is introduced to the project as debt. I would say in excess of 92–93% of projects have a debt structure, such that there is a defined exit for returning investor capital. So what happens is we pull the EB-5 investors into a company called a new commercial enterprise. That company then makes a loan to the project. Let's say it's a 5-year loan. As a result, that 5-year loan has to be paid back at maturity, and then that money is used to repay the EB-5 investor. So the EB-5 investor knows there is a defined capital event for returning my capital. Yes?
Yeah, we're going to get to that. No, you don't have. You can live where you can invest in any regional center anywhere in the United States, and you can live outside that territory. You can live anywhere you want to.
And the good thing is you're not tied to any employer. You're not subject to any employment rules. You can do nothing if you wish to. That is 100% correct. And we will go through that in a specific project. There are two issues. There is the project performance, and then there is the EB-5 visa processing that allows you to become a permanent resident, the removal of conditions. Those two conditions, once they're satisfactory, then there is a return of capital. And as we go through a specific example, we'll answer your question in detail. So the experience and capital strength of project partners and the track record of the regional centers are key considerations for EB-5 investors when they make their project selection. The EB-5 program is currently renewed by Congress through to the end of this month. And we're going to talk about that in a little while again, but we expect the program to be extended. There is a force for change to increase the investment levels, etc. However, in very short, this is an election year. Immigration is a very hot potato in terms of politics, so we expect that there will be another short-term extension, possibly 6 months, without any change. What do regional centers do? So what our company does is we identify quality investment opportunities that will create jobs in the various local communities in which the jobs are located. We undertake due diligence to ensure that the opportunity meets the investment underwriting guidelines, our underwriting guidelines, and also the underwriting guidelines of our partners and our agents. And also, fundamentally, we make sure that all the documentation and the investment process complies with both EB-5 regulation and SEC securities laws. We haven't talked about SEC regulation, it's mentioned a little bit later, but in essence, we are selling an investment in a company. So we are selling a security, and there are securities laws implications as a result. So we select and implement a team to package the project in line with EB-5 regulations to satisfy the criteria and making sure that it complies with federal, state, security laws and SEC regulations. So key team members are the securities attorney. So in terms of packaging a project, once we've done our due diligence and underwrite the specific project, say it's a hotel construction in a specific location, we then pull together the securities attorneys, business plan writer, because EB-5 has its own specific business plan criteria called something called matter of hoe, and we won't go into the detail, but it's an immigration-specific business plan for the project. An economist has to prepare a job creation report, and the immigration attorney has to make sure that we're complying with the appropriate petition rules as amended at that point in time. And sometimes, depending on where we're raising the capital, we need to translate the documents into a foreign language. Although the American or the UK version, the American version, the English version, is the one that is the legal version. What do regional centers do? We lead and manage the project documentation process. In essence, we quarterback the process, which includes preparing all the documentation, the private placement memorandum, the operating agreement, the subscription agreement, the loan agreement, matter of hoe, business plan. We ensure that the job creation analysis is done in a way that there is sufficient contingency, that if things go wrong, there's no issues with job creation, the escrow agreement, and the loan agreement. We also assist in marketing the investment opportunities, make sure that the EB-5 capital is raised, and we asset manage the project and the investors and comply with regional center reporting throughout the life of the investment. What are the advantages of working with the regional center as opposed to doing it yourself? Well, clearly you receive credit for direct, indirect, and induced job creation. We can't say that more than enough. It is such a big, big advantage. Passive investment, the investor doesn't have to do the day-to-day. And in answer to the question, he's free to pursue activities, whatever he wants to do or do nothing, anywhere in the USA. He's not constrained to where the project is located. As a result, what we do is we put webcams on our projects so that regardless of where the investor is, they can dial in and see how the construction is going on their specific investment. The business plan is reviewed by the whole team, and so the risks are assessed and reviewed and minimized. We provide more assurance that the investment will be spent in accordance with the USCIS and Immigration Act requirements, and we asset manage to ensure fiscal responsibility, not just on our companies, but also on the job creation entity, and making sure that we get timely reports, making sure that when they do their capital investments, that those investments are spent in line with the EB-5 criteria, job creation criteria. Now I'm going to let Ryan do some talking.
You need a breather? All right, let's talk about some of the actual transaction details now that we've gotten through some of the legal aspects of things. Regional centers. Regional center how they structure their investments. Regional centers can be public entities or private individuals, and you're typically always for-profit companies. All investments have to be made into what's called a new commercial enterprise. The new commercial enterprise is the entity that an investor actually invests into. The new commercial enterprise must be a for-profit, at-risk entity. Well, it's a for-profit entity, and your investment has to be 100% at risk, meaning there is no, USCIS wants you to have no guaranteed of return to your investment, or a guarantee that you'll get your $500,000 back. They want this to be truly an at-risk, job-creating investment. Typically, there are two types of structures: equity model, loan model. Again, we would particularly say that in the marketplace, there are 90+% of the projects are loan models. And what that model actually looks like, we're up at the top. Below that, we have our entity, which is here. That's usually the managing member, the general partner. Then we have the EB5 investors, $500,000 per investor, which are the members or limited partners. Then they make the at-risk investment into the new commercial enterprise. We're in here as the fund manager. Then the new commercial enterprise makes either an equity or a loan to the job-creating enterprise. Now the key here, since 90+% of the projects that are in the marketplace are loan models, what this actually means is the purpose of this business, or the business activity of this entity, is to be a lender. And so that EB5 investment is actually made into here, and that's where you get the credit for it. Down here at this level are where the jobs are actually created. So, but the business activity of the investment that your at-risk investment is made here. And then, of course, this is the owner. The job-creating entity is the owner of the particular project.
So in essence, the new commercial enterprise is a single-purpose, clean LLC, which the partners are investors.
What's the life of the EB5 visa? Till the new commercial enterprise is alive, is like alive or?
We're almost to that side where I'll give you perspective on what that actual time frame looks like. And we're getting very close to that actual. Yep. That are actually funding the project? Sure. So we particularly believe that within this structure, that the regional center should be independent of the developer. And so we would then require the developer, who is typically, typically an entity of, or an affiliated company of the developer. We would typically require that developer to provide a certain percentage of equity to the project. And then the senior debt is also something that they originate and they guarantee on their end. Does that answer your question?
We will put some numbers on a specific projects as we go through specific projects, because otherwise it means nothing. But as a rule of thumb, we expect the developer to have, of the equity component, a substantial amount, typically 10-20%, depending on the size of the project, and we'll go through examples to answer the numbers. In terms of senior debt, it's anywhere between 55 to 65%.
Now again, these are our particular preferences. The actual regulation, there is no requirement within the regulation for, frankly, the developer to have any cash in the deal. These are things that have to be properly underwritten by an actual
sorry, just a question.
Where's that coming from?
Here.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, sure. Just one question is, like, there is no conventional breakdown in terms of percentage between these equity investment, senior loan, or EB5 as such. I mean, there is no thumb rule as such.
There's no conventional. I will say this. Here's what I'll say. I'll give you some perspective on that. 6 years ago, we would have seen EB5 being somewhere, developers really trying to juice it and try to take that EB5 piece up to somewhere 40, 50%, as much as they can possibly get into the project. Where we are today, it typically looks like the developer should have somewhere between, well, it's all project specific, but the developer is going to have somewhere between 10 to 30% equity in the transaction. EB5 is going to be really these days no more than 30% of the total capital in the project, and then the remaining, coming from traditional senior loan debt is where we typically will see transactions these days.
And the reason is because we want to make, in our due diligence, we want to look at different types of failure, and we want to be sure that the EB5 equity is preserved in some shape or form. We want to be sure that the debt is low enough such that whatever type of project it is, it can maintain debt service, so that we don't have the foreclosure situation under catastrophic failure. So we'll talk about specific projects and answer those numbers.
Now, one of the key things...
One more question.
Right.
This 30%, is there a sort of discipline that this 30% has to be equally divided between Grow America TBD and foreign investors?
So the Grow America portion is really just our managing entity. We are not providing capital to that particular entity.
So what does that arrow signify?
Fund management. Fund management, not financing. Fund management. Yes.
He's a non-owning. He's a member. Typically, we'll structure these as at this level as an LLC, and that particular member of this LLC doesn't have any ownership in that particular entity. He is only the managing member in that particular transaction. Investor considerations, especially where we're at today in the EB5 marketplace, it's a competitive market, which has made actually investors be very diligent on the projects and the people that they work with. Now, conversely, what that has done, that has actually institutionalized the EB5 industry. Previously, again, let's say 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, it was kind of the wild, wild west. It wasn't a very institutional transaction. You had some random developers that would pick up on EB5 and they'd try to take advantage of it, and the documentation was really poor. Everything from the offering documents was poor. The business plans were poor. But the competitiveness in the marketplace has actually changed that very significantly to where now we have some big institutional people that have made the process and the documentation very sophisticated and much more institutional. So the primary goal of an EB5 investor is U.S. residency. That's the ultimate goal. And when we deal with investors on our end, the biggest priorities beyond just obtaining the actual visa for the family is actually return of capital. I know that's kind of shocking. Some people, many years ago again, didn't put too much foresight on, hey, we actually have to give this money back to them at some point in time. But not only are the people and the regional centers interested in that component, but the investors, typically this is what we have seen, it's not your ultra high net worth investor that's making this investor. This is a very significant, meaningful amount to that particular family. And so that absolutely is going to be and should be a huge priority. But that's 1 and 2, visa approval, getting the green card, and return of capital. So what to look for when dealing with regional centers and or different projects that are in the marketplace? An experienced team. You need a regional center that has a track record of both 526 approvals, 829 approvals. Let's talk about that. 526 is the actual initial petition that one submits. The 829 is once you get your approval on the 526, you get a conditional green card. The 829 is to remove those conditions to get a permanent green card. And we'll get into more of that detail here shortly. You need an experienced professional developer. The reason why that's important, beyond the obvious, the reason why that's important is if your number one priority is to get a green card, you need somebody that can actually execute the project. Because if you execute the project, you get your green card. Let's use the hotel. Let's use a hotel, for example. We already talked about the job creation on hotels. Let's use that as a continued example. The job creation comes from hard construction expenditure. So what typically goes on, and this is also a driver to how much EB-5 capital is found in a particular project. You put together your business plan, you submit your business plan to an economist. An economist runs his economic impact analysis or job creation report. Hypothetically, let's say that it creates 100 jobs. What we would do on our end, we would take a discount of that. We would say 20 to 30% discount or a job creation buffer and say that we're going to raise, let's use 20. We're going to raise enough EB-5 capital for 80 jobs. So assuming you've got a developer that can actually execute the project, the minute that hotel is built, before the doors even open, you've gotten your green card because your construction expenditure has been put into the marketplace. You've spent your money, and therefore your jobs have been created, and therefore you're going to get your green card. Now, of course, the hotel should maintain operation, but that job creation has happened. You've spent those dollars, and so therefore that job creation has been done. And so you need a developer that is actually going to be able to execute the project and do it efficiently and well. You need an experienced immigration attorney. You need somebody that can get you through the gauntlet. USCIS they're an interesting animal from the standpoint of they're pretty challenging. There is a template that people who have successfully gotten 526 and 829s approved. There is a templated process, but an immigration attorney helps mitigate a big portion of your risk. You need to ask if the project has an I-924 exemplar submitted or approved. A 924 exemplar is where the project documentation has been sent to USCIS. All of the offering documents, all of the business plan, the job creation report, everything tied to that project has been submitted to USCIS to receive USCIS's approval on that project portion. What happens thereafter is an investor will submit their 526 petition, and USCIS is only, once the project is approved from a 924 standpoint, thereafter 526s are submitted, and USCIS is only adjudicating the 526 for the individual investor, and no longer are they looking at the project.
Yeah, I have a question here. Just
Yes.
one second. This side. Yeah.
Yes.
This one.
Yeah, hi Ryan. I have two questions basically. One is on the fundamental principle of the EB-5 program. Is that, why the principle resides on capital investment? Because, US will have a lot of other sources of investment for job creation, like banks within US, financial institutions, a lot of sources from outside the country as well. So why does the principle reside on capital investment? And second is, what are the risks associated with the investment? Like, what has been the track record of past investments? Has there been any cases of losses of or return of partial capital? So what are the risks associated with it?
Want to take it?
I'll take the second one. I didn't get the full first one.
So the first question is to do with what are the risks in terms of the projects being successful. That's the main issue.
Right.
Okay, so in terms of our track record of GCFID, we have 100% approvals and 100%. We have, where the 829, where the petitions have been approved, we have returned the capital. So it takes about 4.5 years to navigate the process. So we were approved in 2009. Our first project was in 2010. We've done about 14 projects. So the first few projects have been approved, have got permanent green cards, money has been returned. The next 3 or 4 projects have been approved, the 829s have been submitted, the removal of conditions have been submitted, but have not been approved yet. So we're in a process, and some of the new ones, we're only now submitting 526s. So there's a whole range. Now, in the industry, yes, there have been many cases that you're starting to address. So for example, as Ryan said, the program started in 1990, over 20 years ago, okay? At the early stages, the project documentation was not very sophisticated. They never thought about returning investors' capital. They have investors that are partners for life. So that was one fundamental problem that has now recently started to change as investors have become more sophisticated. So return of capital, I would say, as early as 5-6 years ago, wasn't even a consideration. Now, return of capital is an important consideration. So there are 3 main steps. Number 1, how do I get my green card? How do I get the job creation so that I can be sure that my green card becomes permanent? And as Ryan said, we underwrite projects such that as soon as the project is completed, enough jobs have been created to give you a permanent green card. And often that happens. Sometimes where we got a strong NOI, we refinance the construction loan for the project, more than sufficient capital to repay the investor. Sometimes the project gets sold. One of our first projects was sold after 1 year it opened, and that sale proceeds was more than sufficient to pay the investor. So we
Regional center. I think most of the time when we have seen a misbehavior by a regional center, it's been people misusing those funds and for their benefit, and that has typically been as a result of the non-independence or the commingling between the developer and regional center standpoint. So they raise the money over here on this side as a regional center, and then they're gonna loan themselves the money over here on this side, and there's been the regional center should act as oversight for the investor, period. So more investor considerations, capital stack. We talked about the percentage of total capital, the percentage of EB5 capital to the overall capital stack. We've talked about developer equity. Developers should have significant cash in the transaction. And not only, yeah, we'll leave it at that.
I think one thing to mention is, because it's a question that came earlier, what we try and do is we make sure that the investor, the regional center, and the developer's objectives are all aligned. So we make sure that there's more than sufficient financing in the project before we will even release EB5 funds. We make sure the project is fully funded. We make sure that the project is supported by a guaranteed maximum price contract so that it will be completed. So we actually make sure also that neither us or the developer takes any fees or dividends out of the project until after the EB5 capital has been returned.
We'll talk about that down here in a second.
Yeah,
we'll get
go
into
ahead.
the line goals. Some consideration needs to be taken to whether or not the senior loan financing has been committed. That should have been committed prior to, not necessarily when your petition is actually submitted, but it should be committed by the time your funds are released to the project. Oftentimes today what we're seeing is the use of bridge financing. Bridge financing is used, let's say there's going to be 30% EB5 equity in a particular transaction. A developer may either put their own capital, they may raise somebody else's capital, but EB5 could be used to replace that portion of capital so that the project gets started. The regional center could come behind the project after it's actually started, raise capital to replace that bridge capital. Unsecured versus secured loans, what you typically see in structuring these, they are loan models. More frequently than not, you are getting an unsecured mezzanine loan. You are not seeing a bunch of secured mezzanine loans. And the biggest driver of that are senior loan financing. Banks, they have lending limits as a result of the last recession. They have these lending limits where they don't want to have an actual second lien position, which hurts their lending limits on their side. So you are seeing, more frequently, you're seeing these as unsecured. Now, they're unsecured, but they're in a second priority position, second to the senior loan financing. And everybody else should be, if there's other capital in the transaction, everyone else should be below the EB5 capital. There needs to be an EB5 compliant business plan. It's a matter of hoe. It's a specific style of business plan. That particular matter of hoe business plan is extremely detailed. It provides verifiable evidence on every aspect of the project. Takes into consideration whether or not the developer has full control of the land. You have to show that up front. That you've contracted architects, engineers, that you have permits with different developing municipalities. It's a very detailed business plan. That should be in place prior to making the investment. Funding and construction timeline, you need to make sure that that's within reason. Oftentimes, it may take people time to raise capital. It's not, for some projects, especially smaller ones that don't have a huge marketing budget tied to them, sometimes it takes a long time for EB5 to be raised. Just need to make sure that the project and the funding are matched up. Job creation, we talked about the job creation cushion. We talked about ratio of direct versus indirect job creation. Exit strategy. The typical method of repayment for investors are going to come out of three methods, and it's going to be a sale, it's going to be a refinance, or it's going to be through accrued net available cash flows. EB5 in a transaction doesn't stop a developer from, again, let's use a hotel. Let's say if they use EB5 proceeds to build a new hotel. That developer, he can sell the hotel. The biggest issue is that money comes back to, let's say, it comes back to the LLC or the limited partnership that you've invested into. We as a regional center, or us as managers of that particular entity, cannot return the capital to the EB5 investor until he has received his 829 or until he has received his conditions removed from his investment. So we'll get into a timeline of what that looks like in the next slide after this one. Investor responsibilities. Project and regional center due diligence. They need to, all investors, we tell them on a regular basis, we underwrite on our side as a regional center, but we desperately want investors to also underwrite and understand the investment that they're actually making. Understand all of the financial aspects to how they're going to get their money back. They need to, then they'll select the project. They'll select an immigration attorney. Again, work with an immigration attorney that has had EB5 approvals in the past. It's a critical component to getting your green card. Prepare source of funds with an immigration attorney and the accountant. This can be a tricky thing depending on what particular country you come from. We often see challenges especially within the Indian marketplace. There are certain immigration attorneys who do a fantastic job of solving that riddle. You guys, as accountants, understand this particular region of the world and how investors actually work. You guys are extremely helpful in putting together a particular individual's petition. Review and complete offering documents. So let's talk about the source of funds aspect real quick. As Prakash mentioned earlier, the capital must have been invested through lawful means. The evidentiary burden is on the petitioner to demonstrate lawful source of funds. The standard is a preponderance of the evidence, which means the petitioner's claim needs to be more likely than not or probably true. This is the linchpin of getting a successful petition. It doesn't matter if an investor is receiving a gift from somebody, the person actually that's gifting it, you're required to show how that money was lawfully earned and where that money went after it was lawfully earned. So they're going to ask every ounce of detail, and they want to make sure that this is a lawful source of funds. Different types of source of funds: accumulation of salary and income, sale of real estate. We see that a lot from this particular region. Loans secured by one's property. That's a popular one in China. Shareholder's loan. Dividends from ownership of business. And a gift. That's another popular one that comes from this particular region. We often see investors receiving gifts from many different investors. Usually it's one, maybe it's two. But again, we have to prove and you have to show how that money was earned and where that money went from there. So the process, this has been a question that's been asked a couple of times on the actual time. Let's go through it. Once you've selected the project, you prepare and file 526 petition. An investor invests into the EB5 project. So we file a 526 petition. The 526 petition gets submitted, and you get your priority date. Where we're at today, and this is 100% driven by the Chinese overload, is USCIS has become, there is a backlog, and they have been overcome with the number of petitions that they have seen. And so let's look at what we're looking at. The Form I-526, as of today, is looking like 25 and a half months. That's what they have posted. Now, let's give a real-life example. We've seen everything. It may say 25 and a half. We've seen a project that we'll go into here shortly. We've had 100 investors, and of the 100 investors, and this is in one particular project, of the 100 investors, 97 of them have been approved, and that's been within, I don't know, we started seeing the first approvals within a 10-month time frame. Yeah. Thereafter, they've just steadily rolled in. That's somewhat of the great unknown. We have other projects where we have investors who are clipping in at the 24 or 25 months. Sometimes we have investors who will go over that time frame. And that's when we along with the immigration attorney, have to knock on USCIS's door and tell them to go and approve the petition. But the moral of that story is that they show 25 and a half. We have seen investors as of, within the last 12 months that have been approved within a 10 to 12 month time period.
The 25 and a half is an average, so depending
it-
on where you are on the bell curve, it's just a question of which adjudicator is actually looking at your particular petition.
But from our perspective, as people who see it every single day, realistically, it's somewhere around the 12 to 18-month time frame for a 526 petition approval. And what that means is you receive the conditional green card at that stage. So then you go to you do the consular application, you do an adjustment of status, and the investor, the petitioner, and the family have a conditional green card for 2 years. Now, 90 days before that 2-year time period is up, the investor is required to file for an I-829 petition. That I-829 petition is to remove conditions on that conditional green card, meaning you get a permanent green card. Did you have a question? What stage you have to hand over funds? You have to fund prior to making your 526 petition. They want to see your funds 100% at risk. And after you receive your petition, your 829, the EB-5 process is completed. We now have the ability to return your capital. Now, all that being, let's do the total time frame. So let's say it's, let's go on the long end of this curve. Let's say it's 2 years for a 526. You got 2 years for a 526. Again, hypothetical. 2 years, you have to hold the conditional green card. And then you've got the 829 petition. Current statistics on the 829 are a whopping 37.5. Again, real life statistics, that's only as a result of the backlog. Real life statistics, what we're seeing today, are significantly less than that number. The total time frame is typically somewhere between 5 and 6 years, is what we would see from people within this region. Now, people in China have a significantly longer process. Somebody invests in China today, they're looking at a 10, 12, 14-year time frame. And this is as a result of the overburden, or they have gone way over their quotas. As of today, India has not hit that number. It's become a more popular, they're going to hit it at some point in time, but in perspective, that number is not going to drive the delay to a significant degree. What's that? The removal of conditions?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Basically, what has to happen
question.
is that we have to prove that the jobs have been created. So
That's-
if we say that this hotel is going to create 80 jobs, we provide a job study that shows that 80 jobs have been created, and we submit that with the immigration attorney.
Good question. That's what happens at that stage. That's the job creation part. In the meantime, they will look at the individual petitioner as well and say, okay, what'd you do for the last 2 years? Did you behave yourself? Did you pay taxes? Did you do all of the things that you want to show that you are wanting to be a U.S. citizen? And so they'll look at the project and they will look at the investor. Now, from our perspective, what we do to show the job creation, since we use the indirect, or typically it's the construction expenditure, we have the development invoices, the entire budget, and we submit that to the economist. The economist then says, okay, you said you were going to spend $20 million. You've shown us now you've spent $20 million, and out of spending $20 million, you've created 150 jobs, or whatever the number is at that point. And so they're checking the box on that. Yep. There is, again, we are, the way that we would typically advise somebody on how to structure an EB-5 is that we're not worried about the direct jobs. So technically, that particular, let's say it was a hotel, We've spent the money on the hard construction costs, and those jobs aren't created directly there at the hotel. Those jobs are created somewhere that, a pipe manufacturer, he's hired 10 new people. And so technically, that hotel could fail at some point in time. That would be a bad thing because we wouldn't be able to return the money. However, you would at least get a green card. That's why we focus on the indirect job creation at that point.
But also the underwriting of the project is such that we make sure that unless there was some unbelievable catastrophic event, that they should return the capital. So that's part of the underwriting.
But the typical time frame is a 5 to 6 year time frame is what the most reasonable expectation. Now that puts a little bit of light on it's a loan model, and it's a loan to the project or the loan to the job creating entity, and that term on the loan is typically structured as a 5-year loan with potentially 1 or 2 one-year extensions. And the reason why it's 5 years is obvious. There should be a time frame in which somebody is required to actually return capital to somebody, and the hope is that you can match some of that up as far as when the loan matures and when EB5 investors have gone through the petition process.
Now, I'm conscious that we're close to the time here, so why don't we pick one example and just put things into perspective?
Yeah. We've gone into a lot of that.
Excuse me?
Yes?
Yeah. Is there just the return of the capital, or is there any scope for the profit?
Typically in EB5 projects, I think the investment return is somewhere between 1/4 and 1.5% per annum. So the main goal for the EB5 investor is to get a green card and to make sure it's permanent and to get the capital back. It's not an investment from the EB5 investor's perspective. However, the way in which the regional center makes money is the difference between what the project is charged and what we eventually pay out is how we make money on the back end. So that is why in the marketplace, the EB5 investor returns are typically very low.
So I shed some more light on that whole entire scenario. We did on our very first project, we did an investment into a hotel, and we were giving our investors a market rate. I think we were 10 plus return is what we were projecting, and people that we do business with had seen our documentation, and they had seen that we had these 10 plus market rate returns on it, and they said, what are you guys doing? And we said, what do you mean, what are we doing? He said, if you take that to China, China is going to think that you're doing something wrong. And so what happened was that the expectation became no longer was it an expectation to get a return on your actual investment. The real return was the green card, and therefore it had become a nominal return to the investor. And that nominal return to the investor was originally structured to return the fees that were associated with making the investment, was to try to get some return back to them so that they could at least compensate themselves for the fees. Say it again. Yeah, is it possible? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So in the hotel example, and that's what, from an investor's perspective, they should look at that component. From a catastrophic failure standpoint, do I get my green card? And it should be structured in a manner that if there was a catastrophic failure, in any event, you'd get your green card back. That hotel example, you've spent the money, you've built the building, the hard construction costs have created the number of jobs that are required for the number of investors that are in the project, and therefore they get their green card, but they don't get their money. That's in a worst case scenario. The underwriting from a financial underwriting perspective, There should be lower debt on the project. There should be plenty of equity from the developer, and that EB5 component should be insulated to some degree, measuring risk, obviously, to some degree, to be able to avoid any catastrophic. In that particular example, if the catastrophic example would mean that you weren't able to service your senior loan. And if you weren't able to service your senior loan, your senior lender would foreclose on you. You'd wipe out everything else below it, and there'd be no more capital. If you've got low leverage and your project can actually perform on the senior debt, at some point in time, since you're in a second priority position, at some point in time, maybe it's 10 years, but at some point in time, there's going to be enough accrued net available cash flow to return EB5 investors money. So those are some of the things that an investor should weigh when they're looking at projects, for sure. Let's look at a couple case studies real quick.
I have a question on regional center. If the regional center gets terminated, then what happens? Because there was a figure over there, 250 regional centers were terminated. So what happens in that case?
You might have a better
I
answer.
could hear the question.
If a regional center gets terminated.
Okay. So regional centers get terminated for not filing their reports on an annual basis, committing fraud, commingling of funds. The reasons aren't always published. There was a report, I think a blog about 6 months ago. I think as of 2017, I think 250 regional centers have been terminated. Just to give you some perspective, when we started filing our regional center, which was in 2008, we were regional center number 32. As of last year, there were 950 regional centers throughout the USA, of which a large number are not active. They're not actually pursuing projects. So I would say around 200 regional centers are actually active, and from them I would say probably less than 50 have a track record, and probably less than 30 have actually returned capital to the investors.
There have been a couple fraud cases where somebody's terminated a regional center. There's a big one in Vermont where they have taken leniency towards the EB5 investors. They've taken court action and they've taken leniency in favor of the EB5 investors in those particular cases. So I think they're doing everything possible to avoid those scenarios, but they're also somewhat understanding and have been willing. My understanding is that it's just taken longer, but that they have been accepting.
Hello, I have a question here. Here.
Yep.
So you mentioned about EB5 investor where he has $500,000 to invest. Obviously, for a hotel project, that will be not enough, I assume. So would there be more EB5 investors in a specific project?
Yeah, let's talk about one real quick.
And if you could give me some examples of other projects other than that you have taken up, other than a hotel.
Yes.
And third would be, what is it for the regional center? What do they get of managing the whole thing? Is it a percentage of the investment as a EB5 do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Perfect question. We'll transition into all of that right now. Let's give some real life case studies. We'll try to make this somewhat quick so we can get to some more questions. Real life case study. We completed this particular Marriott Courtyard with a local developer in the Atlanta area. It's a 100-room hotel.
It was completed in February of this year.
What's that?
It was completed in February of this year.
It was completed February of this year. We had intended to raise $4.5 million. We ended up putting $5.5 million because we had overwhelming interest in the project, and we had plenty of job creation cushion in the transaction. So in that particular deal, there were 11 total investors in that particular project. Let's see here. There's kind of the team, everyone that's involved. There's the completed project as of this year. That is one example. We've used the hotel. Hotels, it doesn't have to be a hotel by any stretch of the imagination. Hotels have been popular in all different regions, mostly brand-driven. People are comfortable that there's some realm of big major brand that's tied to the hotel. They're not safer than any other investment for any particular reason. The underwriting needs to be completed on these as well. Yes? Yeah. I'm going to go back. Let me go back to that because that's a hugely important point, and then I'll get to this last. So, I didn't mean to skip over this because this is a major point that needs to be discussed. There have been some attempts, because of the overwhelming popularity within the EB-5 marketplace, there have been attempts by certain government senators. These particular senators, it's interesting, their territory or their region used to see a lot of EB-5 dollars, and then Manhattan showed up, and all of a sudden all the EB-5 dollars went away from there and they went to Manhattan. So they got angry and decided to hate the EB-5 program, even though they loved it before. So they have proposed some new legislation which has continued to fail to raise the investment amounts beyond 500,000 to 900,000+. They would also redefine the targeted employment areas. The purpose of that is there's a big argument between, let's say, senators, government officials. The guy in rural America says that his area is in distress and that he needs the EB-5, and the guy over in Manhattan says, well, I'm not going to let the EB-5 dollars leave Manhattan. I want them to remain here, and therefore I'm going to argue against that. It's not the distressed area that needs the jobs. It's actually, even within the middle of Manhattan, the actual new jobs are coming from places located way away from here. They're nowhere near the middle of Manhattan. So the job creation effect is equal in both scenarios. And so now there's a big political battle. That political battle has failed, and this is an opinion of ours. No one's necessarily said that, but that political battle has failed as a result of, it's a general topic on immigration, and immigration today in the U.S. is a bad topic. Everyone argues and nothing happens, and in our opinion, nothing is going to continue to happen. So I think we're kind of at a stalemate until we see comprehensive immigration reform. In our opinion, EB-5 won't change.
There are two schools of thought. The Trump administration has framed immigration as a threat on U.S. security and a threat on U.S. jobs. And they're designing changes to the legislation to try and counteract that. On the other side, particularly Congress, the courts, California, they see that the United States is a land of immigrants and that immigration is a positive thing. And those are the two different camps, and that is why we're not getting any progress.
Now, Trump's an interesting person when you talk about EB-5. He's used it on his projects. He won't come outright and say, he won't come outright and say that he's in favor of it. It's an immigration issue. He's battling other immigration issues, but at the end of the day, he's used EB-5 on plenty of his projects. So the other issue that is going on is in the previous administration, the Obama administration, actually, there's two ways to change laws in the U.S. One's through new legislation, and another way is for that particular agency to make a change to that rule by going through a new rulemaking process. And the Obama administration, before Obama exited office, had put forth new, what they called modernization of the EB-5 program. And in this one, they were going to raise it to 1.3 and 1.8. Now, that's actually still under review within Department of Homeland Security. For whatever reason, it can't get out from review. It's been stuck, and we continue to believe it's not going to go anywhere. So the summary of those potential changes are, it's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen, in our opinion, within the next, let's say, 6 months. At some point in time, without a doubt, we think we will see an increase in the 500,000 level. At some point in time, we believe that you will certainly see an increase. Coming back, we got to wrap this up. Coming back to the last question back there, do you do other projects? Here's another project we did real quickly. This is located at Georgia Tech. It was a $272 million project. It had 100 EB-5 investors in it. You can see here we had senior debt from JP Morgan and Fifth Third. We had sponsor equity, and we had the EB-5 loan. That's Atlanta. And here is this particular project. Oh, sorry, this was done with Portman Holdings. Portman actually has a big presence within India and China market. They have an office in Mumbai. Here's some of their stuff in India. And there's the project as of today, utilizing $50 million of EB-5. Here's the job creation right here. This building's not open, but every dollar that's being spent as we speak is new job creation. So that's how the EB-5 program works. It's sorry we went long. It's a rather thorough and complicated topic, but
We're available for any questions after the session and also tomorrow. So thank you very much.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Patel, and thank you, Mr. Conway. And thank you, Georgia Center for Investment and Development, for giving so much of valuable information. May I request our chairman to come on the stage to felicitate both of our speakers. May I request our speakers also to come on the stage once again, please. And thank you, members, for joining us for this event. Dinner is served outside. And may I request all the ExCom members also to join us on the stage.